Hello, and welcome to Talk Relationship to Me, the show that explores some of the most important relationship topics. I'm Dr. Elana Hoffman. As a clinical psychologist, I focus on all things relationships, from dating to sex to long-term relationships to divorce. I cover it all. I use my professional lens as a psychologist, as well as lived experience to cover these topics. Do you need to talk relationships? You're in the right place. On today's episode, I am covering why dating is not a numbers game and why it is harmful to think about it that way. So this is a big topic. Lots of dating coaches out there will tell you that dating is a numbers game. And the more people that you talk to, the more connections that you make, the more dates you go on, the more likely it is to lead to a relationship. And I have several counterpoints to that because dating is difficult, can be tiring, can be challenging. And there are several reasons why treating it as a numbers game can be really detrimental to, your search for love and partnership and even just connections. So one of the reasons why dating as a numbers game, and this is what I mean by treating dating as a numbers game, just looking at dating as if it is, you're playing the odds. Right. And so you are maximizing the connections that you make, whether that's online or in person. Typically this is used in the context of online dating, talking about the more matches you have, the more conversations you have, the more dates, etc. That's one element of the numbers game. This, of course, applies to in-person too. So going to meetups or singles events or speed dating or things like that with the idea of getting dates. That is what I mean by treating dating as a numbers game. This idea of the more dates you have, the more likely it is to lead to a relationship if that is what you want. And so this topic, this podcast in particular, this episode is, focused on people who are looking for a relationship. And of course, if you are looking for something different, then that not everything I'm going to say today might apply to you. But I'm talking about if you are looking for a relationship, then treating dating as if it is a numbers game can be very harmful, and it can lead to burnout and cynicism about dating in general and about meeting people in general. And again, you'll see these, dating coaches that will tell you, quite the opposite. And they'll even talk about sometimes their own experience, right? If they met a partner. Usually if they are partnered at that point, and they'll give sort of a history, and they'll say, I met my husband on Hinge and I went on, 100 first dates last year, and this is how many resulted in second dates and third dates and relationships. And this is, my husband was one of those first 100 dates, right? And so they'll say things like that in order to, have people believe that this is a path, to lead to marriage, if that is what you are looking for. And of course, yes, in that instance, it was successful in the sense that it led to marriage, but this is not always the case, and it is not kind of a free lunch, right? There's sort of no free lunch. Like, dating is not free in any sense of the word. And so the more time that you take in the pursuit of dates, the more draining it can be, especially when there's not a connection. And the reality is that you are not going to connect with everyone. And so the more time you spend on dates where you're not connecting with someone and you're not really enjoying your time, then the less energy you're going to have for other dates where there could be real connections, and the less energy you'll have for other things in life. And so, burnout is one of the major reasons why it's detrimental to treat dating as a numbers game, because, it's not, again, not even just to go on dates, but to, if you're talking online dating, to make a profile, to put effort into it, to swipe, to chat, to match, to ask people out, or to plan dates, or to, to move things along, right? This all requires a lot of time and energy, and you get back what you're putting into it. So the more time you're putting into it, then the more energy that it takes. And yes, you do get what you put in. And so I'm not saying don't date. But the goal should be, if you're dating for a relationship, to focus on connection and compatibility, right? As opposed to numbers. Because it's not true. The math does not really work out if you are looking for a serious connection. There's no guarantee that the more dates you go on, the more options you're gonna have, and the more likely it is to connect, because connection is difficult, right? To have a relationship where there is compatibility, chemistry, a shared vision of the future, a shared view on how people see the role of relationships in their lives. I mean, all these are really important ingredients for a successful relationship, and it takes time to suss those out. And the more you are not looking for those things, and the more you're instead looking for just more, quantity over quality, then the less energy you'll be able to have to really be able to see, okay, am I compatible with this person? Do I really vibe with them? Is there chemistry? Are we compatible on major dimensions? And, can this move forward? And the compatibility piece is so important, right? So if you're not looking at, are you compatible with with this person, from even their profile or from meeting in person or however you meet, if you don't have an eye for compatibility and instead you have an eye for numbers, you're going to miss the compatible people, and it's going to cost you, time and energy and money and all of these things that go into dating a person that's not compatible. And, dating coaches will also tell you to keep first dates light and to not talk about heavy topics, things like politics, religion. Do you want kids? All these things on the first date. But of course, if you are looking for a relationship where you are compatible with someone, then of course you should talk about those things early on, because why would you go out with somebody who is completely incompatible with you on these important dimensions? And yes, some of these take some time to suss out, and some things can change over time. But if you know immediately where you stand on certain things and you are looking for somebody who is compatible in those domains, then of course you should talk about those things early on to figure out if you are long-term compatible. And as a couples therapist, I see this all the time, where there are couples who did not talk about these things and they are not compatible on major issues. They disagree on major things. It doesn't mean they can't, come together and they can't have a healthy, happy relationship, but it is harder. It is more difficult. And some of these things, could have been seen early on, if there was an eye for really compatibility and connection and quality over quantity in terms of dating. Because, the focus, if you're looking for a relationship, it's important for that to be a good relationship, right? Not just any relationship. So, it's easy to go on dates and it's easy to meet people and connect if that's something that comes naturally to you. And that is not the case with everybody. Sometimes it is very difficult to do that. But even when it is harder for someone to do that and to get dates and put themselves out there, it is still not a numbers game. It's still important to focus on compatibility and connection. Is this person someone that you actually are interested in meeting? Do you want to know more about them? Do you want to share more about yourself? Can you see yourself? Are you attracted to them? Can you see yourself being attracted to them? Are you curious? Are you interested in that person as a person, not as a date? And those are the questions to ask yourself, rather than, going on a date every day and then just going by the numbers, right? Because then what also happens is you treat people kind of as commodities, and you are not curious about the actual person. You're just focused on the number, and you're focused on kind of the wrong things, and you're not actually wanting to get to know someone, and you're not wanting to share and open up yourself. And that's the other thing. That's the other issue with treating dating as a numbers game, is it is sort of a way to avoid vulnerability. And people who tend to have a hard time being vulnerable, those who might have avoidant attachment styles, based in family of origin, and having feelings not really be validated or discussed, or, not coming from a place of being able to ask for help if they need, and just this really vulnerability, they often do treat dating as a numbers game, because it sort of protects them from being vulnerable. And the more dates you have, the less intimate they might be. And that ultimately intimacy and vulnerability is very hard for them. But of course, you cannot have a fulfilling relationship or connection without that vulnerability and intimacy. But if you're focused again on the numbers, then there's not a lot of room for that. Because if you get to know one person sort of slowly over time, that lends itself to a deeper connection and more vulnerability. If you're focused on really the person and the connection and where can this go, rather than I need to schedule 4 dates every week for a month, and then a certain percentage of that will lead to the second date and the third date, etc. The other problem with that is that it's just, again, this is not true, right? Because you are not always in control of your dating life. Somebody might not want to go out with you. They might not respond to your text. They might want to not go out with you again. They might not like you. So people who treat dating as numbers games are also used to kind of having plans and things going their way, and being uncomfortable when that doesn't happen. And so they might be very successful in other areas of their life, careers and things like that, and friends and hobbies and community and all that, where there's sort of more control over the outcome of how they spend their time. But dating is an area where, it's really not in your control, the outcome. And so that can be very frustrating when people who are used to having more control over the outcomes of situations, and then they're finding themselves, not connecting, not getting as many dates as they'd want, people not liking them in the same way, or them not liking other people. It can be a very frustrating thing that is, of course, just par for the course with dating. All this stuff happens. And so it's important to practice and build that muscle, of being sort of out of control in a situation that you're in, when you're not used to being out of control. But people with that mindset tend to treat dating more as a numbers game, because they're very sort of logic focused. And, well, if I put in this effort and I put in this time, then I'll get what I want. And that is not necessarily true, at least in terms of a really healthy, satisfying relationship where there's all those elements that I talked about before: chemistry, compatibility, shared vision of the future, all of these things. It's not so hard to get into a relationship, but it is hard to get into a good relationship with all of those things. And so that is really important. And again, why an eye on the numbers can lead you to a relationship, but it might not be a great one. And so that is what I often talk to my clients about. What are you looking for? What do you want? What kind of relationship do you want? And to have, to focus on those things, rather than, a relationship being kind of the end all be all, and a result of, lots of dates and lots of time, and, it being sort of a numbers situation. So these are all reasons why, why treating dating like a numbers game is difficult. And people will often also compare this to jobs, right? People will say, well, if you're looking for a new job, then of course you apply to a lot of jobs and you go on a lot of interviews and you send a lot of resumes, because it's a numbers game. And, that's also not totally true, because again, there's also this element that is out of your control. And also, even if you're looking for a new job, a fit is very important. It's got to be the right thing. It's got to be the right fit. And there might be, an element of practicality. If you're out of a job, you might need to work to make money to live and survive. And that's a different situation, right? And so, but if that is not the case, then it is still about the fit, right? You don't just need to take any job. You need to take one that is a good fit. And the same thing is for dating and relationships. And of course, with dating and with jobs, it takes a little while, dates, time, to figure out if it's a good fit. But if the eye is just on numbers, you really lose sight of that, and you tend to get just, again, really burnt out. And, the cynicism piece is important, because if you go on 10 dates, and I say this to my clients all the time, if you go on 10 dates and you want to see all 10 people again for another date, you are not being your authentic self, right? Because you are not going to want to see all 10 people again. There's no way that you are compatible, have chemistry with, are attracted to, have a shared vision of the future, all these things with 10 out of 10 people that you go on a first date with, right? So, that is why it can really be. So if you have these, bad dates or bad connections, or not even bad, just meh, dates, then that can really take time and energy away, and it can make you less motivated to continue dating, to meet more people, if you feel like the people that you go out with are not good fits and it's a waste of time and money and all these things. I mean, it never is a waste, right? I always tell my clients, you always learn something from, meh or bad dates and relationships. There's always takeaways. You're always learning. You're always growing. These are important lessons, right, to continue to take with you. But it can, in order to sort of protect energy for people that you feel like could be a good fit, then it has to, the focus has got to be, if you're looking for a relationship, on quality over quantity. And so that is why, this idea of dating as a numbers game can be very detrimental. Not to mention, again, just the practical aspects of time and money it takes to date. And, that time and money and effort could be put toward a lot of other things that you are doing for yourself that is fulfilling and that you have control over and that feel good and values aligned, where dating can be a piece of your life if you are looking for a relationship, but putting so much energy into it really takes away from many other things that are going to lead you to be more fulfilled and get to know yourself better, and then ultimately be able to, make better choices about who you date because you have a better developed sense of self and you can find a good fit. And of course, this is a lifelong thing. It's a process. It takes time. There's no like, you have to be a totally, perfect, figured out human before you date. I definitely do not think that. Um, but, you can figure yourself out as you date, and you can have a full life where dating is a part of it, but not the whole focus. And when you treat dating as a numbers game, it really becomes the focus of things. And also it just, you can miss people, right? If you're dating online and you're treating it as a numbers game, one thing is a deterrent about someone's profile, you just swipe next and that's it. And you can miss someone, you can miss the person. But if you have this mindset of like, well, there'll be someone else that comes along, next, then it really, continues to remove the humanity of the person on the other end. And also, the paradox of choice, right? The more choices we have, the more anxious we might get about those choices, and we might be worried about making the wrong choice. And it's just with so many options and treating dating in that way, it can just be very overwhelming and very stressful. So if you really, think about what it is that you're looking for and focus on that and focus on the person, on the other side of the app or in person in real life, then that is much more, you'll get much more out of it than if you are just looking to date for numbers purposes. So, these are the reasons why it is important to focus on quality of connection over quantity. And the other thing is, if you focus on numbers, it will also lead you to continue to see people that you are probably not all that interested in or that are not all that interested in you. If you think, okay, well, if I get this number of dates, then this can turn into a relationship, then you can miss signs that you're not into someone or that someone is not into you, right? And it can be, you can pursue something that is not mutual, or you can say yes to something that you don't really want to do, because if the mindset is like, well, I'll have more dates and this is what it takes and I got to get to know someone, right? You really got to check in with yourself to see if you are really interested in that person and if that person is really interested in you, and see if you want to continue to date that person. But the focus on outcome and numbers can take away from what you actually want, how you're actually feeling, or signs about how the other person is actually feeling, right? And can lead you to, feel bad about yourself if they don't, reciprocate. And of course, that happens, and the rejection muscle is very important to strengthen. In the dating process, rejection is going to happen, and that's fine. That's great. That's not a fit for you. No big deal. But if the more you can see those signs early on and protect yourself from that, because that leads to just more lack of motivation to continue to date, then the more you can really kind of see that, it's about what you are looking for and what they are looking for, and if it is a good fit. So this is why it can be harmful to treat dating as a numbers game, and why I often tell a lot of my clients like to really ask themselves what's important to them. And we talk about this a lot. And if they are really into this person, or if they just want to go on another date to sort of see, and vice versa if the person's really into them, and just to be really real with yourself and really, honest with yourself and the other person, and treat it as look at dating with an eye of connection and compatibility versus numbers. And it can, again, be difficult for people who are focused on outcomes and are very sort of like logically minded about things like this to wrap their minds around this idea. But this is important. The emotional piece of this is important, a big driver in dating. And so really check in with yourself about, if you're interested in this person for them and you want to get to know them, great. And if you're not, and you're just kind of, quantity over quality, then you're going to burn out. You're going to be negative about dating in general. It's going to affect your desire to continue to date. And, you're not going to show up your full, authentic, positive self, which is important for dating, right? You got to have energy. You got to feel positive about dating. You got to feel like you really want to get to know someone. You want to put the time and effort and energy into dating and a relationship, and it's much harder to come from that place if you have so many dates, and you're talking to so many people that you get drained, and there are bad connections, or people treat you badly, or people don't respond. And, people do this on the internet because people take liberties on the internet that they don't do in real life. And this can wear on someone, and that's real, and that is okay. And so this is just a way to kind of limit that, to really look at it from a compatibility, chemistry perspective. Okay, so these are just some things to think about if you are thinking about dating, and if you're, tempted to look at it from a numbers perspective. This is just hopefully gave you some other thoughts as to why that might not be the most helpful situation. This has been Talk Relationship to Me, produced by Peach Island Productions. I am Dr. Elana Hoffman. Do you have a question about relationships? I'd love to hear from you. Go to my website, drelanahoffman.com, and click contact. Find me on Instagram at dr.elanahoffman. That's dr.elanahoffman. Or you can find all the info you need, including more about today's episode, in the show notes. And if you have questions or comments about today's episode or anything else, I would love to hear from you. You could inspire a podcast topic. Until next time, thanks for listening.